Good evening, everyone. My name is Olivia Simon. I'm the producer of Folks, the Forum on Life, Culture, and Society, and I want to welcome you all to our Folks film series. Tonight, we're looking at a new film, Limbo, which many of you had the pleasure of viewing in advance over the past couple of days. The official release date is this Friday, so we're very lucky to have the chance to share this special film with our audience before it comes out at the end of the week. The film received BAFTA nominations, including Outstanding British Film and Outstanding Debut by a British Writer, Director, or Producer. It's directed by the very talented Ben Sharrock, and this is his second feature after his debut, Picadero, which won several awards at international film festivals and did very well, and was also an equally wonderful film, so I would encourage you all to go view that as well. And the film stars Amir El-Masri, who you would know from The Night Manager, Lost in London, Jack Ryan, even Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker. And it also stars Vikash Bai, who acts in CW's Pandora and Netflix's The Stranger, and has been a part of a variety of excellent film, TV, and theater productions. And we happen to have all three of these wonderful gentlemen here tonight. But before we meet them, I have just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. First, if you're watching us on Facebook Live, where we always have a pretty sizable audience, please like our page and remember to visit folks.org to sign up for our mailing list to learn more about upcoming programs. That's the best way to keep up with what we do. And if you're with us on Zoom, please make use of the Q&A box and drop us a question. We always leave time for an audience Q&A at the end with people writing in from all over the world. So we'd love to take your questions, so don't hesitate to write in. So yes, with that, a big welcome to our three guests, filmmaker Ben Sharrock. We'll just wait a moment for him to pop up. Hello, it's good to see you.
Hello, hi.
Happy to have you here. This is really an incredible film. We'd like to bring on Amir El-Masri, who plays Omar,
Hiya.
the lead character. Hi, Amir.
Hiya. How you doing? You're right.
So funny with Zoom, just getting everyone on. And of course, Vikash Bai, who plays the very lovable Farhad.
Hello, hi. Hello.
Hi,
everyone.
Vikash. Great to have you as well. How are we doing tonight?
Yeah,
Good,
really well, thank
good. It's 10 o'clock here, so like hopefully like reasonably kind of focused and can try and get the some answers out. So we'll do our best.
Yes, for sure. We're gonna move right in, bounce around quite a lot. And again, this is fun, smart conversation. Feel free to jump in and interrupt each other, just to keep things moving. But first, let me just congratulate you on just such an impressive film. It's such a moving story, and it's very originally done. And it's one that's not just timely in terms of the subject matter, migration and the refugee experience, but it's also very deliberate and poignant in how it treats these issues. So a big congratulations. There's a lot for us to discuss, as I said, but I want to start off with the title of the film. It's just one word, Limbo. It's a very powerful word. And, we hear it thrown around in these sort of more mundane, casual contexts that tend to minimize what the word actually means, like being stuck in a relationship or a particular state of mind, or, waiting to hear if you got a job. It's not a word that you would necessarily apply to the context of being an asylum seeker, and yet it fits so perfectly. And after watching the film, it seems so obvious. So, by definition, being an asylum seeker puts you in this in-between state. And we know that definition, is someone who isn't yet legally recognized as a refugee, but has submitted a claim that demonstrates a well-founded fear of persecution. So on account of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, membership in a particular social group. But in any case, it's part of your identity that you have to prove, and that's an incredibly hard thing to do. So we find our main characters here tied to this, defining quality of their identity as they wait to hear on their asylum claims on this remote island in Scotland. So I think this is an interesting place to start, how the film is showing us asylum as the ultimate limbo experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on that idea, which is so beautifully addressed in the film, the concept of limbo and how it relates to the asylum experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something I think that kind of goes back to the sort of idea formulation, which, for me, it really started out with the subject matter that I wanted to make a film about the kind of broad subject of the refugee crisis. And then it was really figuring out how to do that and kind of the way into that and where to focus on, and also kind of in using, my sensibilities as a filmmaker.
Mhm.
And I think at that point as well, you know, as I kind of entered into this sort of huge amount of research that needed to be done, this sort of limbo, this state of limbo that asylum seekers are in, kept on coming up. And at the time as well, I think that there were a lot of articles that came out as well about this sort of experience of being in limbo for asylum seekers.
Mhm.
And then as I went kind of further into that and spoke to people that had been through the asylum system, again, this was what, you know, the word that kept on coming up. And it seemed that that was just this kind of really interesting area to sort of focus on.
Can I just ask, was that a word that when you were having these conversations, was that being brought up or said by asylum seekers themselves? Were they using the term limbo to describe, you know, the state that they were in?
I wouldn't, maybe not that word specifically, but certainly the kind of idea of basically being, you know, you don't have any, you know, you don't have any rights as an asylum seeker. You can't work, you can't integrate into society. You're really stuck, and you're waiting for something to happen. You're waiting for your asylum claim to come through. So you're in this kind of permanent state of waiting. And yeah, so it felt like that was just a really kind of interesting thing to focus down on with this sort of massive subject matter and explore. And I think that part of that as well, I think what did come up in those conversations was how being in that state of limbo and having nothing to do, the psychological weight of that time, and how that the sort of psychology of that then kind of starts to almost then, I suppose, you know, the identity of those individuals starts to kind of crack and kind of question identity. I think I spoke to you know, one conversation, and it was quite memorable in particular, which was it was that what this person was saying was that they were trying to sort of attach themselves to something when they were in, so they were waiting for asylum for 6 years, and it was kind of exploring kind of different areas. So like, and I think he spent a lot of time in the library, and then would sort of become really interested in sort of different areas of like history or different areas. And then at one point, it was across a 6-year period. So then at one point as well, started to reconnect with his faith, and then kind of go back into the Quran and sort of question his faith and question that side of things. And then sort of became very religious during a point in those 6 years, and then actually rejected his faith at a point. And then, so it was like,
so it's like this idea of, like kind of shifting through different types of identities while you're stuck in this place where you feel that, you know, you don't really know what yours is or what it's developing into. I think that's
if you can't really get a job or have a place to stay or have any kind of concrete grounding in who your community or people is going to be, then really there is no sense of identity, really, isn't it? It's just constantly in a flux, and in that state of limbo, while you're losing that sense of identity, you've come from a place where you're persecuted for your identity, and now you've got this chap here who's kind of searching for something to grasp onto. And it seems like, I mean, do you think maybe that's why he was spent all this time in the library trying to find something to be like, okay, I can hold on to this?
Exactly. And I think that's a really good point. And, you know, something that makes these stories of asylum seekers different from other migrants is that they really aren't able to go back home, even if they wanted to. So you know, this kind of story hinges a lot on the act of waiting, Ben, as you were saying. And that's not something that we see, or at least I haven't seen expressed very often in art, this kind of a take on the refugee experience. And also just the fact that when it comes to Omar, you know, his story is not about leaving and arriving somewhere. It's about leaving and then being stuck in this place. And, you know, when we meet him, his journey is incomplete. And then when we leave him, his journey is still incomplete. You know, the whole premise of Limbo is built on this question that's never really resolved, you know, this question mark, I guess. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, and that was also the really kind of important part of it as well, was to kind of make that decision to have the ending like that, because it's not a sort of, it's not the perfect happy ending. And you know, and Omar has been on that journey himself, but he's still in limbo. He's still, so he's dealt with his sort of questions around his identity and sort of taken a step forward in his sort of emotional journey, but physically he's still on the island. He's still in limbo, but he's kind of, he's psychologically he's dealing with it in a different way by the end of the film.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's really great play between him dealing with it psychologically and dealing with it physically, sort of through, the representation of this island where the film is set, this remote, unnamed Scottish island, and even the real filming location, Uist in the Outer Hebrides. I mean, it's a place that most people probably wouldn't even know of. And as a side note, I feel like I have to mention that for those who don't know this was the very first feature film to ever be shot there, which is just, so very rich with meaning. But I think it's really interesting that this is where the film was set versus somewhere like London, a big city known for its multicultural, multi-ethnic makeup. So I guess on that point, why set this film in Scotland? Was this decision about the politics of immigration in the UK and staying true to that? Or did you deliberately pick, the prime location where these men would feel the most alone?
Oh, I think, there were so many kind of different aspects to it at kind of many different points as well in the sort of, idea formulation and kind of, and it goes, so that actually went back, as I said, I started with the subject matter. So, and that's kind of quite a strange way into a film as well. It's normally kind of, I don't know, build a story, but for me, it was like, I want to make a film out of this, and now I'm going to figure out how to do that. So even very early on, it was, we did some location scouting in Iceland in the Northwest Fjords, and creatively at that point in my head, I started with some images. So I was really interested in remoteness, and I was really interested in this sort of Arctic environment, and had these images of this man walking across this sort of landscape and this sort of vast, and so it starts like that. And
just to look the image of it and how to create.
Yeah, and it's like little things like that. And then we went to Iceland and we traveled around the Northwest Fjords and ended up in these kind of tiny fishing villages in the fjords. And then at that point realized, wait a minute, we can make this in Scotland. This isn't too, Scotland isn't too different from this. And then at that point, when we started to look at Scotland, it's also this sort of, there are refugees that were sent to some of the Scottish islands, but in that case it was very different because they had refugee status. They were part of the UN resettlement program, so they weren't asylum seekers. But then also it's quite common for asylum seekers in other European countries like Norway and Finland, Germany, I think, for asylum seekers to be sent to remote communities to wait for their asylum claims. So it was also kind of then looking at those two different realities and then creating this sort of fictional concept of a fictional Scottish island, and then again sort of building on the creative elements of that, of like what the island could bring. And then the island became this metaphor for purgatory, this sort of purgatorial island in a sense. And
yes, that's something that I want to talk about, but maybe a little bit later when we get into sort of more about the story and about I think like the role that music plays in the film and Omar's oud and the symbolism behind that. But yeah, no, that's really interesting to think that you kind of took these different real concepts that were happening in different places and blended them together and created this fictional place, this island where there was really no way for them to blend in, even if they wanted to, to just like slip into society and feel less alone, at least physically. They're not in a place where there'll be many other people from the same countries as them who look like them. So I think it was a very, very, sort of on the nose choice to do it that way.
I should say as well that it's also kind of not necessarily, the other reason for that was that choosing that island and making it fictional, but then also the locals that inhabit the island, because it's not about them being Hebridean or Scottish, so that we've got Sidzi who's Danish and Boris who's English and people from Glasgow. And so actually it became as well kind of more about a pan-European response to the refugee crisis as well, rather than something that was specifically about commenting on Scotland.
Yeah, that's another really, really excellent point. So I want to move into talking a little bit about the relationship between Omar and Farhad, your characters, Amir and Vikash. I think in a way, Limbo could sort of be seen as a film that subverts the like buddy film trope. Typically you have characters who start out disliking each other, and there's so many different variations of this across time, where the characters are rivals, but then they're dependent on each other in some way. And that's, then it creates this really predictable sort of relationship arc. But in the case of Limbo, you have a total kind of reconstruction of that, where you have all of these additional connotations that make the relationship so much richer and so much more complex. I thought it was really interesting how the support and dependence piece kind of comes first as they're navigating this experience that no one else can really, sort of relate to. So even though they might not be best friends from the start, they have this understanding that kind of binds them. And then, they need each other in order to stay sane, to kind of keep things in perspective. And then it's not until the end that you have, that sort of underlying competition or rivalry over their asylum that's vocalized, when Farhad finds out that he's received asylum, and he says something like, "Don't you hate me now?" This kind of automatic assumption that Omar will resent him for that. So, I'm wondering sort of why conveying this kind of a friendship was so integral to the story.
Wow, what a great question.
I guess on that point, I mean, given the nature of that ending, I think it was not so much the rivalry, but the sense of attachment and the loss of a friend, someone that has been through that journey with him, and him having to leave him behind. Those are little relationships that they cling on to, and I think given the weight of where they've both come from, even though they probably wouldn't have met on a normal day in a normal circumstance, this is so much, just so less kind of a problem of them getting to like each other because
they've been waiting for this
history.
letter to arrive for the same amount of time almost, when although Farhad's been waiting for a long time, but when they meet, they've been waiting for this to come. They've experienced this kind of waiting together, and so that moment that happened, it's like, I've got mine, you've not got yours, right? That's it. That's the end of the friendship. Surely right.
Right, because one of them is breaking out of limbo, at least in one sense, at least in the physical sense. But that's a very good point. And Amir, I think it's a nice sort of nuanced way of reading it too, and very, very simple. Like they were friends, and now what happened, what happens next? And I think, again, kind of returning to the word limbo and the way that this film transforms it, it takes like the surface level meaning of these words that we use all the time, and creates a very profound way of understanding them. And another one of those words is friendship. It has, very simple meaning, given what Amir was saying, but then also this more complicated one that has, that undertone of like what happens next. And is there something competitive about this friendship at the end of the day?
I think if it was competitive, it would have been, even the little nuances with the coat and the exchanges of their own interests, that it would have grated on Omar's skin a lot easier. But I think there was a level of patience in Limbo that they both had with one another. It's a bit like.
Do you think that came from their relationship with each other, that patience, or is it something that they both arrived there sort of already with?
I mean, I can only speak for my character, but I feel like Omar developed a sense of numbness, I guess, being stripped of his identity through that journey and having to kind of carry his cross throughout the story. There was bigger fish to fry, and actually having someone as endearing and as warm as Farhad, I liken it to an annoying brother that you put up with,
Yeah.
But you still find incredibly endearing
Yeah.
and charming.
Yeah, no, I think I really like that. I think you're right. He's such a lovable character, and Vikash did such a beautiful job of bringing him to life with his facial expressions and movements, just everything that is him. But I think you're right, Amir, and something that that Farhad does for Omar that it seems that Omar isn't able to do for himself is that he kind of serves as this vehicle for him to open up and be more honest with himself. And then at the same time, he also has this like very clear-cut narrative where he's really outspoken about these like identifiable elements of American culture. He talks about Tom Cruise and Jerry Maguire, and he idolizes Freddie Mercury, and of course his chicken he names Freddie Jr. But when it comes to kind of talking about his own identity, we actually find that he's quite private. And it seems that maybe he's using these larger like expressive cultural ideas to kind of express himself, like maybe channeling the more repressed parts of his identity through them. So I'm wondering if when he and Omar have their argument, when Farhad it tells him why he left Afghanistan, and it's this huge personal revelation for him where he says, I couldn't be who I am back home. Like, do we think that that's an additional level of this limbo for Farhad? The idea that it's not just the politics of his home country that he can't return to, but also himself in the context of that country.
Wow, gosh, I don't even know how to answer that. I think, I don't know how to answer that.
It seems like an
so.
like an internal kind of limbo, maybe, where he's kind of been, he's not been able to be this part of himself or express this part of himself, and then when he meets Omar, he's finally able to at least mention that it's there.
Yeah. I think he's really trying to be himself, isn't he? And the way in which he can do that, I think, is through having a friend. And finding that friend in Omar. And I think perhaps his need to help Omar through his grief is a way for him to connect with him, to create a friendship. And if you have a friendship, then there's more opportunity for you to be yourself, I guess. And it gives rise to the chance for him to display a bit more of his own personality and reveal some of his own truths.
They kind of help each other become more open in a way. They sort of help each other come to terms with how their identities are changing, or at least are. Someone used the term influx, which is a great way. I think it was you, Vikash. But yeah, they sort of help each other in that respect.
They crack the each other's kind of glass. The facade that they're for so long. Farhad is constantly going, are you just going to carry this like it's a coffin? Like, just in other words, can you, like, what's the issue, what's the deal? Like, your arm is okay now, like, come on. And on the flip side again, like, you have you come to Scotland to live this fantasy life? Have you come over because you want to live like the Americans do, eggs sunny side up? They're both kind of interrogating one another in a way that only kind of a familiar relationship can.
Right. Yeah.
I think there's also, I think that there's also an element of fear in both Omar and Farhad as well, in terms of their identities, because they're in flux, and obviously in Farhad's case, he's afraid of he's been back home, he's afraid of the judgment, and his sexuality and what that means in the context back home, and he's afraid of that. I think that he's also afraid of because that's so kind of being ingrained in him. He's afraid of that, of Omar judging him in that sense, and the others judging him in that sense, and and he's been waiting for asylum for 3 years. So it's something, I think that there's an element of that, and I think in Omar's case as well, it's like I think there probably is an element of it's of fear in that he is afraid of who he is in this new context, that he is Omar, this talented young musician in Syria, and now he's Omar, this asylum seeker who plays an instrument that no one cares about in Scotland. And he's afraid of what his identity is now that all of that's been taken away from him. So I think that that's also kind of, it's like they both have a lot of, anxiety and fear within them while they're both stuck in this state, and it kind of that sort of manifests in different ways, and obviously they're in those two characters.
I mean, I think Ben and Amir, what both of you were kind of speaking about with regards to Omar, just turning to him for a second, how he's so resistant to playing his oud, to perhaps, expressing his cultural identity in this very unfamiliar place. He says that he has an issue with his hand, but as the film goes on, it becomes so obvious that he's just using that as an excuse, that there's perhaps some even guilt built up around how his identity might be changing. But I'm wondering, why use the oud as the object that Omar is carrying around? Why is that what we see? Because I think, it's not something related to any type of political or religious identity. He's not carrying the Quran. It's this instrument that kind of signifies a universal language. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's so many kind of things connected to that. And, I have to say that part of that root is probably, going back to my own time in Syria and having this incredible memory of being at the Citadel at night and watching this incredible oud player, Sharrock play. And that just being a memory that stuck in my mind kind of when I entered into this process. But then it kind of became very apparent and clear to me that the oud could just be this incredible metaphor because it's, for a start, it's connected to his family. So it's his grandfather's oud. So it's connected to his family, but it's also connected to his home, because the family home, the garden, is engraved in the oud. So it's part of his family, it's part of his tradition, his culture. It's also, the oud is made from walnut wood that's specific to Damascus. So it's actually made from the ground, from the soil in Damascus, so in Syria. So it's all kind of connected to his homeland, and he carries that around with him.
On the family point, his father also played or plays.
His father also plays. So then that's that. So then it's all of these things that are connected to his family, his culture, and then it's locked away in this case. And that's also, that's very deliberate. So it's really like it's kind of his, and it's the line from Farhad in the film, like, it's a coffin for your soul. And it really is that Omar's soul, he's locked it away in this case. And we also deliberately got an oud case made that looks like a coffin. And he carries that around with him all the time. And that's also, just kind of jumping back quickly to the identity, that there was a point in the writing process where there was this realization that it wasn't kind of as simple as a crisis of identity. What it was about was him suffering for this grief for what he regards for the loss of his former identity. So then that's why there's sort of these kind of motifs in the film that are related to sort of death, and they're kind of
exactly,
and all these things, because it's actually about grief.
Right. I was just going to say, his dad has this line that he kind of, and the brother says the same thing to him, this line that they beat into him, which is a musician is dead if he doesn't play.
Yes. Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. Just these, and then of course Farhad's line, which you've mentioned, the saying that the oud is a coffin for Omar's soul. It's reminiscent of purgatory even more, this other manifestation of what limbo is. So again, it's really just fascinating how everything is connected in this film. So I'd also like to kind of move into sort of the timeliness of this film, of telling this story. Obviously telling refugee stories, it's been timely for many years now. It's been important for many years now. But in the last few months, we've seen these big changes to the immigration process in the US and in the UK, where the film is set, that may make the subject matter even more timely. In the US, we have new administration that's attempting to reverse the policies of Donald Trump, continuing to uncover new information about the results of some of those policies. And of course, the UK recently came out of its Brexit transition phase, and is set to have this new body of rules governing immigration. And so, Ben, I know you've had extensive experience telling these cross-cultural and refugee stories. So Limbo isn't, it's not totally new ground for you, but it is being released at a time when we're seeing, certain changes take effect. So, what was motivating to you about this particular moment in time to tell a refugee story, specifically this one? And of course, to Amir and Vikash, what was motivating to you about getting involved in this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, it's actually, the crazy thing is that it's so kind of, unfortunate how relevant it still is, and this process started for me, being interested in the subject matter, sort of, 10 or so years, but writing the screenplay, working on it 5 years ago. And at that point as well, it's kind of, it's an absurdist concept in the beginning, to sort of, for me, thinking about this absurdist concept where you could use this kind of mix of humor and drama, this idea of a group of asylum seekers that are sent to a remote Scottish island to wait for their asylum claims. And then now, 5 years later, the UK government have come up with new proposals to send asylum seekers to remote islands. Wow. And so it's really kind of crazy how this has come back around, and how it started with, this absurdist concept for me, and how it's, unfortunately, so relevant. And now the government are actually thinking it would be a good idea to send asylum seekers to remote islands. And I think, and I think that this really kind of goes back again to the point where I wanted, to make a film about this subject, which was that I felt like we were sort of experiencing this process of dehumanization in the media, and how, we have the sort of the demonizing of refugees, which is dehumanizing, and the pitying of refugees, which is dehumanizing. And then also just speaking about refugees as sort of numbers and statistics. So, when governments now, and it's as well, I think last week, in Denmark, they announced that now Syrian refugees, they were taking away their leave to remain. And, with the idea of sending Syrian refugees back to Syria, claiming that now Syria is a safe country. And I think that all of these things are kind of connected to the dehumanization of refugees, because these people in government feel that they can do these things to asylum seekers and refugees because they're not seeing them as human beings. And then also, because of these media depictions and everything else, then the people are also kind of, they're dehumanized to the people, so that the people aren't going to rise up and be passionate enough to fight against this. So then it just ends up in this sort of kind of perpetual, cycle.
Well, and also, I mean, this film does such a great job of humanizing that experience, of giving dimension and weight to something that we've seen portrayed time and time again in the media as either what you said, something people to pity, or people that are perceived as a threat, just grouping them into these two extremes. But there's something very honest about how each of the refugees depicted in the film, interact with their environment, how they interpret their experience as it's unfolding, and also, how their pasts inform, if and how they're able to move forward here. And that's just, it's something that should be intuitive. It should be intuitively portrayed. So, this film does, such a wonderful job of that. I think. Sorry.
So I was also just going to jump in and say, because I also think that what's really interesting in that discussion is also the idea of the good migrant or the good refugee.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that, you know, I wanted to avoid in this film, and something that you know we all spoke about was that you know, not having the sort of, you have this kind of the typical, this idea of the you know, the good refugee who's often a you know, a doctor or a lawyer or maybe like a pro kind of athlete or something, and there's sort of a kind of a broad range of different sort of approaches to life and different stories of how Omar and Farhad and Abedi and Wasif became refugees. Right. And I think that that's also, you know, it kind of, it's a sort of big part of the film. And I also wouldn't say, I think there's, because I've also heard, you know, this question about Omar's character being the good refugee, but I don't agree with that either, because I don't think that's the case, because it's, you know, it's such an obscure, him being a musician, but it's something that's also very specific to his culture.
Yeah. Well, and I think in his case, you know, a Muslim coming from Syria, a war-torn country, we see that his journey is filled with, you know, much more ambivalence than a lot of the, you know, sort of refugee stories that we've seen in the past. You know, there's obviously this, and Limbo's set in the UK, but historically there's this well-known American immigration story where, you know, you're coming to the promised land, you know, the Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, these symbols of hope. We've seen this in so many films. I think of like Barry Levinson's Avalon, you know, which is inspired by the experiences of his own family, where his grandparents came to America from Russia. And like, it's completely that mentality, you know, the bright lights and the beauty and the promise of America, of leaving home. But for Omar, it seems that, you know, he doesn't really fit into that idea of wanting to leave home, of wanting to make a home in the Western world. You know, there's this feeling that if he could go back to Syria, if it was safe for him to be there, that he would. And I think the film is so honest in depicting that, you know, not everyone is excited about making that journey. You know, is that something that you would say is true about Omar?
Yes, I think that's absolutely it. That it's like that. Oh, you know, he didn't want this. That's the point. You know, he didn't want to leave Syria. He didn't want to leave his family. He had a good life there, and this was something that he was forced to do. You know, it was, and I think that's it's an important part of that message. But it's also equally important, the ambiguity, you know, around the characters of Abedi and Wasif, the idea of the economic migrant, that you could do, and there's ambiguity there where you could say, well, Abedi and Wasif, are they economic migrants? And it's almost like that's been so demonized in the media quite broadly, but it makes it's so kind of such a simplistic way to go, economic migrants bad, right? You know, refugees coming from war-torn countries good. And that's and it's not, you know, it's not as simple as that. And it's a little bit like the past the sell by date speech from Wasif early on in the film.
Yeah, I mean, Amir, what do you think about you know, this kind of narrative for Omar? I think I saw you speak about this in a recent interview where you kind of said something similar, that this isn't really necessarily, you know, he's here, but does he want to be here? Is he excited to be here? Is he happy to be here? You know, there are those questions that get addressed in the film and addressed through how you portray him and the style of the film. And I think it all comes together to kind of express this very, you know, sort of ambivalent answer.
Yeah, totally. I think it was important for us to convey that kind of that he was completely stripped back of his identity throughout the whole film, pretty much until the end where he starts playing, and you see him being a lot more kind of expressive. I think what I loved about the script from reading it firsthand was that there are so many little nuances about his culture, and he's constantly reminding everybody around him how much he loves his family, he loves being back, or how much he would kind of what he would do to be back home. And I think it is really, really vital and important. And it's such a subtle message. It's not we're not hitting it, on the head with it, but that he would want to be nowhere else but home with his family playing music.
Yeah.
And I think because he is stripped of that, you see the weight on his shoulders almost until the end, where he is allowed to kind of just accept that for now this is his reality.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And obviously Omar is an asylum seeker, as to sort of the story that I was mentioning or referencing before of, the American immigration story of opportunity and promise. That's obviously a very different narrative, but it's the story that we see very, very often expressed in art. And this is something that is very different, and it's refreshing to see this portrayed in such a way. So yeah, it's just wonderful. So I know we don't have that much time left. I know you guys are in the UK and it's getting very, very late. There is one more sort of question that I was thinking about in watching this film, and it's sort of that in this film, there's a lot that subverts how Muslims are typically portrayed in film. As we know, most films about or involving Muslims that came in the years following 9/11 were about terrorism and counterterrorism. And beyond that, we have all of these depictions that seem to have relied so heavily on, political or religious elements. And Amir, I think you've been outspoken about something similar before, how given the types of roles and stories, it's just sort of like pigeonholing and stereotyping actors from diverse backgrounds. I read that you were initially hesitant about doing a film about the refugee crisis. But in this film, there is a different story that's reflected, especially with Omar. It doesn't get into the politics of the refugee crisis. It doesn't deal with extremism. It's not making a statement necessarily about religion, but it still does raise these questions about culture and compatibility even, by looking at Omar's relationship with his culture and his home country and what it means to now be in the UK. So I'm just wondering sort of what your thoughts are on that. Everyone.
I think what I loved about the character was that we don't shy away from him being Muslim. It is there. It's in the background, and you see him mourning, the loss of his friend later down the line, but by praying over his grave. But I think more often than not, Islam is used to perpetuate a negative stereotype of on whatever project it's in. But with this, it's just a part of his identity. It's neither doing anything, it's not having an effect on the narrative as such. And I think that is important, because it's still, again, it's just a subtle little message that the hate that we do see, or the situations that come and arise is nothing to do with religion. It's people that use it as a mechanism to drive their own agenda. That's
a really great observation. I think, do we have time for just one question from the audience before we wrap? We can make it very quick, but there's a great question that came in that says, I think the film made a great point of showing the taunting of the refugees by the locals, but also the great acts of kindness, the grocery store clerk who ordered the sumac ingredient, and the fact that everyone showed up to see the concert. Can you all speak on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, that was a kind of very important part of that balancing process as well, because I think the easy thing to do would have been to create the sort of typical trope of the racist bigoted locals, and it just felt like that is, I think in the process is you go, that's sort of what we've seen before, that's kind of the way, and then for me it's like I immediately I want to challenge that, because that's far too simple, and it's not, it just kind of undermines the kind of complexity of that issue. And then also being from Scotland as well, there's also I don't want to create that depiction of the islanders either. So it's I think that having that balance and not having that kind of I think cultural reconciliation narrative was very important, but to also be kind of truthful about it as well. So to not kind of entire, that unfortunately, racism and ignorance and bigotry is something that a lot of refugees experience. So that's also something that couldn't just be kind of outright avoided. So it was really a case of kind of looking at a new way to sort of bring that in.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it also seemed at least with the concert, that there was something there about music, again, like being able to bring people together to sort of bridge these, cultural lines. But, even the very culturally out of touch, crazy seminar leaders, just hilarious. The opening scene was very, very iconic. But, even they might have no idea what an oud is, but they're still curious about it. It's something that kind of, oh no, go ahead.
No, sorry. I mean, like just off of, Ben's point as well, like we were filming on an island in the Uists, and with locals that were very curious, and they took time out of their day to hold down set and help us with the difficult conditions that we had. And I think we're not making things up. This is a true reality. People want to help, people want to contribute, people want to be inclusive. They don't want to single people out. We felt that love on that island for sure. And there were people in that audience in the final scene that were from the Hebrides as well. So it's lovely when the fiction and reality kind of blend together.
Life imitating art imitating life.
Exactly.
Because that curiosity really seemed there in the film. So I mean, it's just very sort of fitting to see that was reflected also when you were filming. And I think I also read, wasn't there like a woman in the crowd who thought that the story was real, that this was a story being filmed, and that you were an oud player who had come over?
Is that right?
was that I think I read that. But
it's true. Yeah, that's true. And she was actually in when we were shooting the final concert, she was in tears when we were shooting the final concert.
Well, that's a very fitting way to end this conversation. Thank you so much to you guys for being here. We'll say official goodbyes in just a moment, but I just have a few closing announcements to run through before we officially say goodnight. So starting with next week on Monday, May 3rd, we have our highly anticipated program, When Political Protests Become Theater, covering high profile political protests, how they've captured the public's attention, what happens when instances of protests result in violence. And this event will feature Manhattan DA Cyrus Vance Jr. and one of the members of the Chicago 7, Lee Weiner. And we'll also take a look at his recent memoir during the conversation. This was postponed, so please make sure to register for that. The new date is May 3rd. And then we also have a new Conversations on Essential Cinema event featuring critically acclaimed actor Mark Feuerstein. You'd know him from Royal Pains, Prison Break, In Her Shoes, The West Wing, 9JKL, and so much else. So we'll be discussing Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather Part 2. Don't miss that. You can sign up for both of those programs on our website, folks.org. And that program specifically has also been postponed, but we are working on a new date. So yes, please don't forget, we're a nonprofit. We've been offering all of our programs for free, easily accessible to you at home throughout the entirety of the pandemic. So please consider making a donation to us. Everything helps us continue to operate and produce programs with outstanding guests like Ben, Vikash, and Amir. And with that, I would like to say thank you to these three. It was such a pleasure to have you here tonight. Limbo is a film with so much beauty, intimacy, intelligence. You should all be so proud. And to our audience, I'm saying this now, if you haven't seen the movie, you want to, trust me. And if you've seen it, I know you want to see it again. So make sure to look out for the film this Friday when it will be released by Focus Features. There should be a link in the chat where you can eagerly await for the film to drop. So thank you so much, Amir, Vikash, and Ben. This was such a privilege, and congratulations again on your film. It really is so wonderful. Thank you, everyone. I'm Olivia for Olivia.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you. Real pleasure talking to you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Good night.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.